Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How AP Automation Helps Property Management Weather an Economic Storm. My name is Mark Brousseau, President Brousseau & Associates. I'm pleased to be your moderator for today's webinar. Today's webinar is brought to you by Corporate Spending Innovations, part of Edenred, as well as IPS Edenred. I'm pleased to be joined today by Sean Madigan, Property Management Business Line Manager for Corporate Spending Innovations, and Rich Armenio, Business Development and Strategic Partnerships Manager for IPS Edenred. A few housekeeping notes to go over before we get started with today's webinar. To ensure call quality, everyone's voice lines have been muted today. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. To ask your questions of our panelists, please use the Q&A tool on your screen. And finally, a recording of today's webinar will be made available to all of you after the event. We encourage you to share the webinar with your colleagues and industry peers. We know that storm clouds are gathering. The combination of sky-high inflation, rising interest rates, a challenging labor market, and clogged global supply chains have made a recession seem inevitable. The question for many property management companies is, how can we navigate such a challenging and uncertain economic environment? During today's webinar, we're going to share with you strategies for how you can leverage accounts payable. That's right, your accounts payable function to provide stability during these tough economic times. A quick glance at today's newspapers will show you that some sort of an economic slowdown appears to be inevitable. We can argue about whether it'll be a soft landing, a hard landing, or the status quo, but the fact is that many finance leaders are bracing for the worst. They're starting to take action to try and prepare their organization for the possibility of some sort of a slowdown. Meantime, the labor crunch has complicated things for businesses. At the time when we're uncertain of what the economy will bring, businesses are having challenges hiring and retaining staff, particularly in functions such as finance. And property management companies are not immune to any of this. A recent study by PricewaterhouseCoopers really shows the type of environment that property management finance leaders are facing these days. Days sales outstanding, that measure of how long it takes us to collect cash, that recently reached a 5-year high. Days payable outstanding, the time it takes for us to pay our suppliers, recently increased by 7%. Net working capital has reached a 5-year high. Return on invested capital is at a 5-year low, and net debt has now reached a 5-year high. Put it all together, and many organizations are feeling a cash crunch, if you will. And Sean Madigan, this is having a big impact on property management companies and the way they're viewing their financial plans for 2023, isn't it?
It certainly is, Mark. In what we've seen a lot happening in the property management world is a lot of it has to do with reduced revenue. A lot of property management companies kind of, look at things that lost ancillary fees like resales and demands. But one of the other things that a lot of people don't really look at is the financial loss from fraud. And Mark, fraud is up almost 106% in 2021. We've got bad actors out there that are submitting erroneous and fraudulent invoices, and there's no checks and balances in some places for property management.
This is an environment, Sean, where it's really hard for property management companies to free up the cash they need in order to grow their business, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, cash flow is obviously a big piece of the property management industry. I mean, I think we can all look at from a property management perspective, there's not a lot of, when we're looking at cash flow and how quickly revenue is coming in and, watching it and kind of keeping those controls in place.
Yeah. Rich, when you talk to CFOs at property management organizations, what are they telling you is their thinking about the economy in 2023?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Mark. And really what they're saying is they're looking for alternative ways to one, generate more cash, and two, save more cash, right? And technology has become, the forefront of giving them the ability to do just that.
Rich, we know that in good times, businesses can become lax about the way they do things in the back office. And the fact is that I would argue when it comes to accounts payable, many property management companies and businesses at large have been very lax about their processes. Is this something you would agree with?
Yeah, yes, I would definitely agree with it. Property management companies are one of the industries that I work in where I still see a very archaic type of back office function, to say the least. There's still a lot of paper being processed, and it's interesting to see that not only is there still a lot of paper coming into the back office, but there's also people who are receiving invoices on their email, for example, printing out those invoices, creating a physical piece of paper to then just put that document back into their computer. So it's definitely something that is very relevant within and across the industry.
In the course of just 1 year, Rich and Sean, it's been surprising to me how we've seen a sea change in the priorities of CFOs. Earlier last year, as we were coming out of the pandemic, CFOs thought this was their chance to grow, and it was all about growth. Well, now they've shifted their thinking, and it's more about how do we find ways to improve efficiency, to strengthen cost controls, and to enhance business agility in the event that things do go sideways, as the saying goes. One of the things that CFOs will likely encounter when they look into their back office is exactly what Rich was just talking about. And that is that outdated approaches to paying suppliers is likely holding their business back. The way that most businesses respond to an economic downturn is pretty clear cut. They tend to fire people. They shut things down. They resort to costly borrowing. Well, Sean, Rich, and I believe that there's a better way for businesses, no matter how big or how small, to navigate an economic recession. We believe that efficiency is the first step toward economic resilience, if you will, to providing that ballast during rough economic waters. Talk to me about this, Sean. How is it that efficiency of all things can help a business navigate a recession?
Sure. Mark, I think it's a great question. I think if you step back and look at some of the efficiencies and some of those steps that you have to look at from an operational perspective, is not just you've got the faster workflows. How can I ingest an invoice and pay an invoice and pay my vendors? But it's also that strategic piece of the value behind it, where you're paying your vendors are getting paid faster, more transparency into the payment. And realistically, the allocation of staff and stabilized operations, I think we can all agree, Mark, that there is a big issue in the property management industry in general, but I think across all industries, that there continues to be an issue with staffing and having folks that are happy with their job. So if you're looking at how to be able to look at a stabilized operation so that you can adapt to how your business is growing. You have to shift at this point where you have to, look at how things are going. I mean, we all thought, like you said, Mark, we all thought this year was the big year that we were all going to do great, but now we're seeing things are changing a little bit.
All right, Rich, we know every business, particularly property management companies, want to do more with less in times like these. Talk me through some of the efficiency gains that your property management clients have been able to achieve as a result of automation.
Oh, where do I start? I mean, one of the top things I see is that there's a lot of people stretched right now, and I think Sean he indirectly touched on it by saying that people you need to keep your people happy, right? And in order to do that, you can't stretch them too far. And if you stretch them too far, then they're going to get stressed. They're going to get overworked. They're not going to be happy with their job, and they're going to want to move on. So now is really the best time to utilize technology. And that's what most of my clients are seeing, is that they're utilizing the technology to now allow the people that they hired to focus on the value added work that they're there to do, and not focus on the repetitive, mundane tasks that take up 50% of their time, that provide little to no value to their everyday workflow and work process, and let them focus on ways to improve the overall business.
Well, today's AP department is overrun with manual and semi-automated processes. Today, only 9% of all AP departments operate in a fully automated environment, an environment where both invoices and payments can flow electronically and touch-free. Today, only 26% of all invoices can be posted to an ERP without any human intervention. 58% of AP leaders tell us that managing multiple systems is the top payment challenge that they face. In many cases, the diversification of payments has created this unintended consequence of us having to deal with standalone systems for each of the types of payments we use for our suppliers. And as Sean said, fraud is a big concern for AP departments. Today, 40% of all AP departments have experienced multiple fraud attacks within the past year. And in many cases, fraudsters are becoming more sophisticated. Why are we in this mess, Rich? Why is it that so many invoices require so much manual handling, even at a time when many AP departments have already automated?
Well, that's a loaded question, right? And I'll try to keep it brief, but there's technology available to handle this on the front end of the process. A lot of the times, what I see with a lot of property management organizations is that they're finding all of this out when it's just too late, right? The invoices come in, it's been approved to pay, the payment goes out, and then they realize, days, if not weeks later, that wasn't supposed to get paid, right? So utilizing technology that can automatically validate that vendors are part of their vendor master data set, in order to get them paid, and catching that at the front end will enable them to focus on, all the other efficiencies that they can gain without having to worry about that later in the process.
Sean, for years, AP leaders pined for the day when they could pay their suppliers electronically. They thought that would solve all of their problems, but it hasn't really worked out that way for a lot of property management companies, has it? Talk to me about the challenges that organizations face when it comes to paying their suppliers, even at a time when more of it's being done electronically.
Yeah, Mark, this slide it says a lot. We're talking about today's reality with the accounts payable, and property management in general is typically a little slower to respond to technology and adaption to be able to do it. But moving into, we all wanted electronic payments. I mean, I think Mark and Rich, you probably, you guys probably make payments by using your credit card or Zelle or your Apple Watch, however you guys are being able to do it, and adapting those payments. That I think that property management companies think that there's this inherent risk that their vendors are not going to want to do it. And Mark, that's just the opposite. That's not what the vendors and the suppliers are talking about. They want their payments faster. They want to be able to see that payment show up much faster. They need the transparency. Let them do what they're good at, and that is servicing your properties, taking care of the clients that they kind of service. And the best thing from a property management perspective is to really build that vendor relationship. So if you can pay those vendors faster and easier, more transparent, and with less fraud, Mark, I mean, you said it perfectly, that we're still stuck in this paper check process, that we're accepting a payment or we're mailing out checks, and then that check's got to be received by the vendor and they have to go deposit it. With electronic payments, it's just a much easier way for cash flow to happen.
of the problems, it seems to me, is that when we look at property management companies, they're trying to grow. They're trying to free up their people. They're trying to free up their cash to drive the business in a highly competitive market. And yet you're both painting this picture where their staff is weary and exhausted and bogged down by manual tasks. Have I got this right, Rich?
No, 100%, 100%. I mean, there's so many small little tasks that go into the overall end-to-end process that it's honestly hard for most organizations to tie that directly to a lost revenue opportunity or a lost cost savings opportunity or whatever you want to tie it to. There's so many tiny little processes that go into each of these steps that humans have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, if not on an hourly basis. So that's why most of our clients are making that shift and seeing the value of utilizing technology, because that's what technology is good at doing, right? That's what it's been doing for a long time. It's automating repetitive, easy, simple tasks in a more efficient way than quite honestly, most humans can do, right? So
Yeah. And Sean, the way that property management companies and AP departments in general have gone about solving the problems that Rich is talking about is by automating what I'd say in piecemeal approach, right? They take care of perhaps the invoice receipt, or maybe the data capture from invoices, or maybe they put in a workflow system to route those invoices electronically instead of using email, or maybe they went to their bank to do ACH. But the fact is, Sean, that this piecemeal approach just hasn't worked out so well for property management companies, has it?
No, it really hasn't. With this piecemeal work, when you're not looking at a full invoice to payment option that's out there, or invoice to pay option out there, and when you put these pieces together, it puts a Band-Aid on the problem today. Sure, if I had a workflow process or my vendors were emailing them in, but to Rich's point earlier, that's only part of the problem. If you piecemeal parts of this process and to be able to do it, you're just kicking that can down the road that your employees, you haven't really built the efficiency to be able to get the full automation behind it, because there's much more than I can create the efficiencies and the automation behind it. But when you take it to that next level for validating the supplier information, we're taking out some of the fraud pieces with it, but the payment transparency that goes with it, when you look at it from a bigger picture, it really becomes when you piecemeal things together. But if you look at from a complete package, there's a lot more that can be done in invoice automation.
And that is where we believe property management companies have an opportunity, even in these uncertain times. We believe that full AP automation can help property management companies navigate these tough economic times. And to do that, Sean, is what we're calling full invoice to pay automation. All right, what is this, and how does it differ from the way that most AP departments have gone about automating AP?
Sure. We touched on it a little bit before on the slide before, but when we're talking about a full invoice to pay automation, there's a lot more to the process. When we think about supplier enablement, who's contacting the vendor and asking them how to be able to receive electronic payments, and then you've got the piece behind invoice processing and automated payment processing. But Mark, we haven't even touched on reconciliation and reporting. That's a whole different piece of it. If you can report that information back and be able to reconcile your payments almost in an immediate perspective, it really just becomes a bigger piece of it. But from a property management perspective, you as a property management company have to report that information back to your owners or to your investors or to whomever you're working with. And then at the end of the day, it's also at the end, to round it out, it's supplier management. So how am I managing my supplier relationships, and how am I working with them to be able to really offer a full invoice to pay automation?
Is it fair to say that a weak link at any one of these steps, Sean, could undermine the entire process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you think about, all the pieces and steps of automating and monetizing and optimizing payments is just, there's so much more to the process. One of the things that if you look at it, if you step back and look at it, that, technology in general, technology is moving towards the details now. Right now, we're moving towards details and getting away from the new hot thing that's on the market. I mean, AP automation, invoice to pay automation, certainly been around, but now if we can look at that from an efficiency and tweak on how you look at how your company is running to provide some of those to process those invoice and payments.
All right, Rich, let's drill down into this. What does this full invoice automation do? This the invoice to pay automation do?
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of Sean there, the key right now is to fully optimize the end-to-end invoice to pay lifecycle, right? There's like Sean just said, there's been a lot of focus on automating, and it's been around for a while. So, just, being able to receive an invoice and capture the data with an OCR tool and get it into your system, right? So that you could help at least with one step of the process. Well, that was 10 years ago, Mark, right? You know that better than anyone, right?
What are you trying to say, Rich?
So that was 10 years ago. Now it's time to optimize. Now it's time to use different rule sets with different departments, with different PMCs, with different people within the organization to fully automate the process and optimize who's getting that invoice and why are they getting that invoice. Well, the technology knows now. The technology knows to send it to this person at this property, and it needs to go to a person at a specific board member, whatever it might be, right? I can go on and on about this, but in short, we want to focus on optimizing the process, not just getting the data, but utilizing that data in the most efficient and effective way possible.
And Sean, once we've done that, it does far more than just improve your operational efficiency. It also creates some opportunities to accelerate your cash flow and create new working capital. Talk to us about that.
Sure, that it rounds out the whole value add proposition. Mark, we started talking about how AP automation and invoice to pay automation is really kind of evolved into this thing, that piece of it. But where you're looking at from an accelerated cash flow perspective, that now property management companies can step back and look at how they're paying their vendors, and they can generate additional new working capital that kind of comes in through rebates, through card. You're getting the benefit of both when you look at a full AP automation perspective, that you're getting the efficiency, you're getting the back office, you're doing the transparency and reducing fraud. Hey, guess what, Mark? We just now added additional cash flow opportunities and working capital for you.
That's right. And this is exactly what AP has not been perceived at for years, right? AP has always been the quintessential back office function, a drain on company resources, which you're describing, Sean. Now we're returning money to the business. So the question I think a lot of folks might have on the line, Rich, is, all right, so how do you guys do this, right? What are some features we should be looking for in a solution to help us achieve the type of improvements you just described? Walk us through that, Rich. What are some key things we should be looking for in an invoice to pay solution to make sure to deliver the types of benefits that you and Sean are describing?
Yeah. So when I think of that, I think of, one, make sure you're getting the easy stuff out of the way, right? At the bare minimum, which is what I was talking to earlier, the ability to extract invoice data from the invoice, right? Now, well, how effective does the solution that you're looking at extract the data? I would be looking at something no less than 99.5%, right? Because if you're going to invest in that solution, you want to make sure that solution is going to save the time that you're looking for. So the automatic extraction, a configurable and user-friendly workflow to expedite the approval processes of invoices and to efficiently handle exceptions and resolve exceptions as quickly as you can. as well as a solution that can use business rules and a wide variety of business rules to minimize those exceptions as well. What exceptions can we handle on the front end with the supplier before the invoice even makes it to one of your properties, for example? And then ultimately working with a solution that can make the payments and that can make all of your payments, not just one, not just the virtual cards, but the virtual cards, your ACH, your checks, your wire, all of it together, so that you can focus again on what you want to focus on, which is improving the overall financial department within the property management organization, as well as maximize your cash flow as well.
Sean, I know someone listening to Rich just now heard him talking about electronic payments. They're thinking, my bank can do all that for payments. What's the difference between working with a fintech like you versus a bank when it comes to electronic payments?
I think one thing that, Rich just hit on it a second ago, your bank, so we're able to, from our perspective, we're a one source solution. Our system is a one source solution for all payments types, for your card payments, your check payments, your ACH payments. Your bank isn't going to offer that. They're not going to go out and figure out what's the best way to pay that vendor, be able to do it. But now we're talking about your bank. Is your bank going to go enroll your vendors to see if they want to accept payments by card? Are they going to give you rebates back to be able to do that? But from that perspective, are they looking at their vendors and looking for the best way in how the vendor wants to receive payments, and then monetizing that entire process to really just provide more cash flow, real-time cash flow for property management companies and executives?
All right, so how do we do this? You might be wondering. Well, glad you asked. Sean and Rich want to walk you through an action plan for how your property management company can automate accounts payable right from invoice receipt through supplier payment and reconciliation. And the first step, Rich, is what you were alluding to earlier. That is, audit your existing technology. What should we be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be looking for, is the technology serving the purpose that you ultimately want it to serve in its best environment possible, right? So is it solving, I'm just going to go back to the data extraction piece of it in terms of, is it extracting 100% of your data, or is it extracting 50% of your data? Well, if it's only doing 50%, then it might be time to prioritize that as an initiative to find a better solution for that, right? So those would be some of the things that I look for, and making sure that you're looking at, is the solution that you have in place acting as a single source of truth for your AP, right? Do you have the transparency and visibility from the time an invoice comes in to the time a payment is made, and understanding what happened in between those processes and knowing where those sit? So if a vendor does call, can you let them know? And there's just so many aspects of it that you want to make sure that what you're using gives you that full transparency into the entire and overall process in solving the end result that you're looking to solve for.
Sean, the second step to implementing an invoice to pay automation solution is to benchmark yourself. We know benchmarks are critical to shining a light on things that aren't working well, identifying areas of improvement, measuring progress, even building a business case. Question is what are some key benchmarks when it comes to doing all of that? What should be some benchmarks property management companies should be looking at in their invoice to pay cycle?
Well, I think if you step back and take a look at your entire organization and you look at what are the steps that need to happen. Rich was talking about in the invoice and taking an invoice, but stepping back and looking at how you can maybe remove some of the extra steps. Is it over needed? Is there a need for it? What about looking at invoices that can be 100% automated? What if nobody had to approve an invoice because it's already a budgeted item that I can just simply push that invoice through? And then how do you handle exceptions? How do how are the exceptions being handled in there? You need to be able to look at these things and really bring in a trusted company, a trusted advisor that helps you understand, AP automation. It's, from a simplistic view, you can talk to people and I think they get the general understanding of it. But if you step back and look at the individual processes, I think you'll dive a little deeper into it.
One of the key pieces of advice you both shared with me was to understand your suppliers' needs. Sean, why did you believe that was so critical?
Well, we touched on it a little bit earlier, Mark. We started this conversation off talking about, a pending recession, or however you want to look at a rough economic times. Your vendors are in the same needs that you're into, and they have the same situations of cash flow. But you need to understand what your vendors want. Do your vendors want to spend time, submitting, mailing in a check, an invoice to you for you to mail back a check for you back to them? They probably don't. They probably want their money as fast as they can get it. So if we can start reducing some of those pieces of it, but it's asking your vendors, asking those trusted vendors that you're using at your properties today is key to understanding what their needs want. And I think if you step back and look at it, it's going to be the same things we just talked about. It's going to be transparency, and it's going to be reduced fraud. And I want an easier way to receive the monies that I owed for those things.
Rich, we know that any plan for automation is going to go through the boss's desk. Question is how do we get them to sign off on AP automation at a time when they might be tempted to say, we're hoarding cash. We're not spending a nickel on automation.
Well, I think that's an easy one, Mark, right? It's build the business case, right? And if you're working with a good, solid company that takes a consultative approach to this process, they're going to help you build that business case. So identify your needs, create a matrix that scores each of those needs on a certain level of importance, develop the objectives that you want to achieve, and determine the timeline. Go to them with this well thought out, with the benefits, with the cost savings, with the productivity increase percentages, right? Or estimated, and to tie back to the beginning, work with someone who's going to help you do that. And then you should get the buy-in you're looking for.
So Sean, you wanted to share the story of Associated Asset Management, one company that put the types of strategies we've been talking about to work in their organization. Tell us about them.
Sure. Mark, we started working with AAM probably 6 or 7 years ago, and they're just like, what we've all experienced out there, large property management company with over 1,000 properties that they manage, 30 accountants across the process. So they were very paper-based, receive the invoice in, I capture it, I put it into my ERP, and then I'm making payment, waiting for it to get approved. But what has started happening is that you started seeing errors, because we're all human, right? And they became costly errors. Like we were duplicating payments. They were late on payment fees that were kind of coming in. Oh, did that one get approved, Joe? I don't know, and then finding out later it wasn't. And then there was additional fees behind it. So what we found is that when we implemented our full AP automation, that payments were approved and sent out in days, Mark, not weeks. It was days. We were able to, ingest an invoice and approve and workflow process, and that vendor received their payments quickly. The biggest part of this is that they reduced those monthly late fees down to nothing. And do the math behind that. $500 in late fees that they were reducing down to less than $50 a year is just a huge be able to do it. And on top of that, they gave the vendor multiple payment options. They can say, would you like to accept payment by virtual card? It's a much faster, more secured way. Would you like to accept it by ACH? We can mail you a check. Now, here's the best part about it is that we were able to convert almost 30%, between 20 and 30% of their vendors over to electronic card, over to virtual card, which was a significant increase in not only reducing the amount of checks that they had to mail, but we also generated additional revenue for the client that they had not seen before.
So Rich, CSI and IPS have come together to provide this end-to-end invoice to pay solution. Talk to me about what that means to the property management companies that are listening in today.
So I would say that it means, one simple thing. You're working with a vendor who understands the entire invoice to pay life cycle and can provide you with the consultative approach that you probably need in order to, achieve best in class results, right? And what you're seeing here on this slide is truly the end-to-end difference in being able to utilize certain components of the invoice process to enhance the payment process, and vice versa, using certain components of the payment process to enhance the invoice process. So that is the true difference of working with a company that can do just that.
All right. So what will that do for a property management company, Sean? What can these folks achieve, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that property managers can achieve right off the bat, we've talked about it. I think we've talked about it enough that we're able to automate the AP process, reducing overhead, freeing up staff time. We're able to optimize those payments so we can scale it. We talked about a little bit earlier that technology is moving. We're getting into the details now. It's past the, invoice automation has been around for a while, as Rich said, for 10 plus years. Now we can give crystal clear and accurate vendor data. And then on top of it, we're monetizing, we're generating working capital, we're optimizing cash flow, and we're turning AP into a profit center.
That's right. So tell me about some of your customers and some of your suppliers, Sean.
Yeah, sure. So here are some iconic property management companies we worked with. You'll notice Associated Asset Management there in the center, Buckingham Properties, great company to work with, Covenant Property Management, APM. Some of these companies, they realized early on, Mark, that they needed to be able to accept and automate their process if they wanted to grow. And this is just a small example of some of the property management company that saw this and be able to do it. One thing we didn't really touch on, but during the pandemic, we all had this situation where every property management company that didn't have AP automation in place was running around trying to figure out how they were going to pay their vendors. And these companies looked at it and they were in the forefront. They were a leader in this area to be able to do that. And the vendors behind it, we're paying vendors across the country. Here's a couple notable points. Republic Services, Cintas, Otis Elevator, Aramark. These are all industry companies. I've been in the industry for a while, and I've looked at a lot of vendor relationships, and you can look at it. It's the same. It's pretty much the same across the board. Now, are we going to get all the property or all the vendors out there? Well, that's where we come in. That's where we're able to be able to reach out and enable those vendors to be able to accept payments that way.
That brings us to the Q&A portion of this webinar. If you haven't already submitted your questions for Sean or Rich, or if you've thought of additional questions, go ahead. Use the Q&A tool on your screen to submit them to me now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Our first question, Rich, is from Lane. Lane wants to know, so what functionality does CSI and IPS provide that I can't get from my ERP or accounting software?
Well, what I would say is your European accounting software is meant to be the system of record for all the entire business, right? Not just accounting, but also human resources, supply chain, finance. All of the above, right? Where we're focused is on the accounts payable process. And maybe there's some ERPs out there that have a slight enhancement towards their, invoice ingestion, or some level of an embedded payment through a PayPal or something along those lines, right? But what you'll get with a company who's focused on AP automation is that they're going to continue to improve and enhance that process way quicker, right? And also with way more enhancements than you would typically see with with just your ERP system, because again, they're looking to solve a much bigger challenge, right?
Sean Jess wants to know, do you find that suppliers are more willing to accept virtual card payments these days?
I think there's absolutely a shift in how vendors are accepting payments that are out there. And yes, there is a significant increase in vendors accepting payment by virtual card. And the main reason is what we brought back in the main piece of the presentation, and that was your suppliers want the same things that you want as a company, and they want to be able to receive their funds faster, deal with the cash flow with it. So, we've seen year over year growth as far as AP, acceptance of payments that are in that world. It's much different than it was 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, where people really didn't understand how electronic payments worked. And now there's more adaptability behind it. I think, as small businesses that are out there, they're looking for ways to become better. And this is a great example behind that.
And that will be our final word. Sean, Rich, thank you so much for an excellent presentation and for sharing your insights with us. And thank all of you for taking time out of your busy days to join us. For more information on corporate spending innovations or IPS, I invite you to contact Sean or Rich or visit their websites on the internet. On behalf of CSI Eden Red and IPS Eden Red, this is Mark Brousseau. Thanks so much for joining us. Hope to speak with you all again soon.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.